right, welcome to another episode of the Rest and Recovery Podcast. Today I have on Jason Donaldson, Head of Training and Operations at Power Speed and Endurance, and located across the pond in Perth, Australia. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Scott. How are you?
Great. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to kind of digging into kind of the coach's mindset when it comes to fitness and working with athletes and being able to, integrate recovery, whether it's active or straight up taking a nap or whatever that looks like, into the training protocols. So, but before we get into that, just why don't we give a little background on you and how you evolved to become head of training at Power Speed Endurance?
Long story. I'll try and keep it short. So my original background, I was a police officer for 20 years here in Western Australia.
Wow.
And I've always been involved in, staying fit, keeping fit, sport, that sort of thing. I played sport my entire life. And then being a police officer, I just wanted to be fit for work, fit for duty. But I never really knew what that meant, whether it meant being able to lift a lot of weight, run a long distance, or both, or even how to train for those. And I used to just kind of fumble away myself doing a bit of both, never really combining them. And then back in about 2004, I came across CrossFit, and it just kind of made sense to me. And then so I started exploring CrossFit, getting into that sort of thing, playing around with that. That eventually led to, while I was still in the police, I was training in that sort of fashion, and a few of my friends were interested in what I was doing. So I started just helping out a few friends with their training, that sort of thing. That eventually evolved into me doing some study, some courses to become a strength and conditioning coach, which eventually led on to me suddenly having a business and coaching others while I was still in the police. Then that eventually led into opening up the first CrossFit affiliate in Western Australia back in late 2007, early 2008. And then that led to me taking an athlete to the CrossFit, or coaching an athlete at the CrossFit Games in 2010.
Oh, wow.
And then that's kind of where I connected with Brian McKenzie. I'd hosted the CrossFit Endurance Trainers course at my CrossFit affiliate in 2008. And the guy that came out for that, Carl Borg, who runs a strength and conditioning facility in LA, Carl stayed with me for a week, looked after him and kind of stayed in contact with each other. And then when I went out to LA for the games in 2010, he connected me with Brian, so that I could take my athlete to Brian's place for some training in the lead up to the games. And then kind of evolved from there. Brian he knew my name from, within CrossFit, and a few people that we mutual acquaintances, that sort of thing. And then that led to him offering me a position with CrossFit Endurance. Started coaching the CrossFit Endurance trainers seminars in Australia, New Zealand, went up to Japan to Kadena Air Force Base up there with the US military, did a seminar up there. So I did that for about 5 years, and then essentially CrossFit Endurance evolved into Power Speed Endurance, and that's where we find ourselves now.
Awesome.
So hopefully that was a short and sweet version.
Yeah, it was. It was right on point. And so Power Speed Endurance for me is relatively new. I think it's probably 9 months. And that whole, coming from an endurance mindset, I grew up running cross country. And when I grew up, you didn't have strength in running. If you did a circuit workout, that was a lot. Other than that, it was just keep going, right? Kind of like Forrest Gump, I was running. So, but over the last, 9 months or so, it's really been an eye-opening experience for me to see the value of strength towards an endurance athlete. Just for those listening to Jace, I've been working with Jace for the last 3 months, working on a training program for a marathon. So, been a great experience. I can say that, personally. But so as a coach, you mentioned a couple different sports, CrossFit, obviously you do, endurance sports as well. it looked like you grew up playing some Australian rules as well.
Yeah, played Australian rules football for 20 years. Went back, eventually essentially retired from that when I was about 23, 24 because of injury. Fairly injury prone. And then went back last year at the age of 43 to play Masters football.
That sounds wise.
Yeah. In hindsight, no. And I knew it was probably a bad idea at the time. But it was more social than anything else. And I still love getting out and having a kick at the football. And I lasted 3 games and broke my collarbone. And that was the season done for me. And then and now this season, which is currently on hold due to the virus, I'm now the coach of the team this season. So it's probably a wiser move for me to step off the field and into the coaching role.
So speaking of coaching roles, so you have a pretty diverse background, as I was saying, in different athletic endeavors. You've got the short burst, which is a little bit more CrossFit, but then you've got the CrossFit Endurance Evolution. With that diversity of experience, how do you see a common thread among athletes when it comes to creating programs that include the proper measure of periodization and recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. The common thing really is that we have to do just enough with that athlete to stimulate an adaptation, the adaptation that we're after, the positive adaptation, and then we have to allow sufficient time for recovery. We have to allow time for that adaptation to occur, because if you just constantly loading stimulus on top of stimulus on top of stimulus, by way of volume, or intensity, then you get to a point where you either plateau and you don't get any better, or you don't get those adaptations or improvements, or you actually go backwards, and you get injury and those sorts of things. So it's about balancing up the stimulus with the recovery, and that's where the craft comes into it, and the experience, and you only get that from experience, from doing it. You can
the art side of the science, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I always say that programming is part science, part art, part guesswork. Sometimes you'll program stuff and you'll get it wrong, and that's just the nature of the beast. You just hope that you don't get it too wrong.
So when you onboard a client, what are some key performance indicators or metrics that you look at to assess someone?
So really we look at that person's history, training history, their injuries, any illnesses, any sort of limitations they might have had, and it's about building a profile of that person. So you look at their history, you look at where they're at now, what's their training looking like, what's their sleep like, what's their actual recovery like, what's their diet like even, what are their stresses in their life outside of the training, and then you also look at where do they want to go, what's their goal, what are we training for, what's the sport, even with what's the sport, what's the distance, are they an ultra runner, are they a marathon runner, half marathon runner, or a 5K? Right. Or, same with, swimming, triathlon, any of those sorts of things, OCR, and then in field sports, that sort of thing as well. I've got a few military athletes, tactical athletes that I work with at the moment. So it's really building a comprehensive profile of that person, that athlete, and the person outside of the athlete, what they're doing, other parts of their life, so that you can then get a picture of, okay, how am I going to program for this person? Where do we need to go? Where are we at? That sort of thing.
So very personalized and adapted to the individual and the various, elements that influence it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can get so far with a generalized program, and a lot of people do extremely well on that. And my program that I personally follow, my training that I personally follow is the PSC Pro training program, which is a generalized program, and that's sufficient for me because I'm not training for any specific sport or event or goal, other than just to stay generally fit and healthy. So that works. But then when you get into wanting to train for, specific goals, then you need to really individualise it a little bit more and take into account a lot of other factors.
Yeah, and I guess depending on where you're coming from too, like you said, a prescripted program is, progress over perfection, right? It's doing something. Yep. And then that's, like you said, it's the art side of it too, is you got to do it to find out in order to know how you're going to respond to certain stresses and if a particular weight or speed is too much.
Yep.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, you find out on the back end when you're wiped.
That's right. Yeah. And that's why the coach-athlete relationship is very important, as in the communication, particularly if you're doing it remotely or online, because you're not there with them. You can't see what's going on. So the communication is important. So there's that feedback coming back from, I deliver the program, the athlete, performs the program, but then they need to tell me how it was, how they felt, what their paces were or their speeds or their weights they use, all that sort of stuff. Because otherwise, it's like, as a coach, you're flying blind. You don't know really what's going on and whether you're on the right track or not. Because it's from that feedback that you then progress and adapt the program as you go along. So, whenever I'm programming for somebody, I always have an overview, that might be about 12 weeks, depending on how far out their event is. So I'll have that 12-week overview of, the perfect kind of progression that we might follow. But then that might change weekly, depending on how the person's feeling, stuff that comes up in their life, that sort of thing. I've got a couple of athletes I work with at the moment that travel quite a bit, usually, not at the moment, but normally travel quite a bit.
Right.
So, and they travel at short notice as well. So their program can adapt from, time to time, dramatically based on that. Particularly with a couple of my military athletes, I might just get a message from them saying, I'm off, I'll let you know when I'm back. And then that's it.
That's it.
You've got to be adaptable.
Yeah. So can you unpack for a moment, like within a particular program, say it's a strength event or activity, how do you determine the gap between efforts? So if it's, 5 rounds, an AMRAP of something, how do you determine what that is on any given day?
Well, good question. It really depends on the individual. What's their experience? Do they have, with a workout like that, which could be seen as like a CrossFit type WOD, what's the person's experience with that? Have they done that sort of training for a number of years, or are they new to it? If they're new to it, then I'm less concerned about intensity, time, that sort of thing, and more concerned with just how they're moving and getting them, used to that sort of workout. So I'll typically allow for quite a bit of rest in between, say rounds. So we might do 5 rounds, but what I tend to do these days is use breath as the gauge for the rest. So they might do 5 rounds, resting in between each round until they can get back to 3 consecutive nasal exhales of 7 seconds duration. And I'll typically use it at 5 seconds or 7 seconds. And in that way, it's kind of their physiology telling them they're ready to go again, rather than me saying, rest 1.5 minutes between rounds, because, that's going to be different. That's going to be a different recovery point for everybody. 1.5 minutes, I could be recovered, by that point, or somebody else, might not be recovered by that point.
So the breath work kind of makes it a universal gauge, individualized almost. It's like the same method, but individually.
Yeah, and then it goes kind of one step further than that, because also it's an immediate gauge in that particular conditioning piece itself. So after the first round, you might get back to 3 consecutive 7-second exhales within a minute. After the 4th round, it might take you 1.5 minutes because of the accumulated fatigue. So it's giving you, it's an immediate kind of gauge for how you're recovering, but also allows the person to know straight away whether they're good to go again for the next round or not, sort of thing. So, and I mean, the first time people do that, or the first few times, they're not really, it takes a little bit of practice to get used to that. Okay, what actually is 3 consecutive 7-second nasal exhales?
Right.
But over time, you learn, okay, that's what it feels like. That's what it actually feels like to be recovered, rather than relying on an external gauge like a watch or something like that.
So then, it depends on the experience of the athlete, like all of it, right? And whether it's, and then so the objective within the effort may vary. So the W might be the fact that you're doing good form and function first before you start looking at load.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Load kind of comes down the track a little bit from, I want people moving well first, and then we want to add a little bit of speed or intensity, and then we want to worry about volume or load or doing it more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's always the balancing act. With as you then start to introduce load or volume, then intensity might drop, or technique might deteriorate. But we want to kind of then pull back from that to maintain that intensity and the mechanics and the technique.
So for an athlete listening right now, so you just touched on something. So what would be like, maybe if you could repeat that, a key trigger to know when enough is enough? So you're kind of pushing that envelope, like you said at the beginning, but not going over the cliff.
So let's use an example. So let's use a running example, doing intervals. Let's say you're doing 8 by 200 meters. And your first, I want to see consistency across those 200 meter efforts. I don't want to see the first one at, let's say 30 seconds, and then the last one at 50 seconds.
Right.
That's the intensity there, or the time is really dropping off there.
Yeah.
I would prefer to see kind of, 35 seconds. It's kind of 33 to 37 seconds max, variation there across those 200s. If somebody's doing it, if they then do that same set again the following week and their times are way out again, then that's telling me, okay, they're not really dialed in with pacing. They don't understand or the feel of pacing. Mm-hmm. But also, it could also be an indicator of they're trying to go too fast. They're trying to go out the door too quick. And so we need to dial that back. Go, okay, you need to slow down on those first few so that we can then get some consistency across. Then when they start having that consistency across those efforts, then we can start going, okay, let's ramp up the pace a little bit and see if we can maintain a faster pace across those. And so it's a matter of kind of taking a step forward, seeing what it's like, adjusting and going again from there, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But if somebody's getting slower across those efforts, we go, okay, we've got to look at your training and go, why are you getting slower? What's impacting on is there anything impacting on your recovery? Are you under recovered? So do we need to change some things up? Or if they're, same goes with their strength work. If they're not slowly increasing weights, or they can't hit weights they were previously doing a couple of weeks ago, then we've got to look at, okay, why is that? You're under recovered. You've got maybe a little injury that's niggling away. What's the reasoning behind that?
So it's funny you mentioned the term under recovered. Had a conversation, actually, one of the earlier episodes with a friend who does ultras, and he mentioned the difference between under recovered and overtrained.
Yep.
And go ahead.
Sorry.
I was gonna let you expand on that.
Yeah, I tend to just use the term under recovered rather than overtrained. Yes, there is a particular definition of overtrained, and then you get overtraining syndrome and things like that, which is kind of a chronic thing. But I like to kind of head that off at the pass and look at, okay, are we under recovered to begin with? What's our recovery like? If you focus on that recovery, then you can tend to, maximise the training rather than rather than focusing on, am I doing too much training, I look at kind of how's our recovery, how's our stuff outside of the 1 hour a day or the 2 hours a day that we're training, and is that optimized, is that maximized, so that we can support the training. Because if somebody is training 2 hours a day, 6 days a week or whatever, but they're only sleeping 5 hours a night, then it might not be the training that's the issue.
Yeah. There's going to be a gasket blown at some point.
Exactly. They can't keep doing both of those. So it's like, okay, let's address what's going on with the sleep. And then that might be, then if you start getting 8 hours of sleep a night, then you might actually be able to support that training. So yes, technically that's probably overtraining for somebody that's getting 5 hours sleep a night, but let's focus on the recovery side of things.
Yeah, it's a great practical example, because there it's clearly the rest piece that's underachieving. That, because the person could be capable of doing those efforts, but because of the lack of rest, their body can't recover fast enough and kind of get to where they need to.
So you got to look at the big picture. Got to look at all the stuff that's happening outside of the training, as well.
Yeah,
what's impacting on that.
That, and it sounds like too, it just takes time, and you have to play the long game with it. And sometimes that's on the athlete side of it, which we both know well, that's what some of the hardest parts is. Like, in your mind, you think you can, or you can, but you're not quite there yet. Yeah,
absolutely. It's and that's probably the biggest thing we see today. Everybody wants things now.
Yeah.
The instant gratification.
Yeah.
And I read years ago, I don't know whose quote it is, but strength takes a lifetime to build. People go, when am I going to get stronger? Well, just keep lifting stuff, and in about 20 years, you might be strong.
Yeah, exactly.
But
a little bit every day.
Exactly. And as you mentioned earlier, progress, not perfection, and that's, I often say to people, they'll be like, I want to get stronger in my squat. I'm like, okay, well, at what point will you be able to say I'm strong in my squat? What weight is that?
Right.
They're like, 100 kilos. And I'm like, why 100? It's just like, they just pick that nice round number.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, why not 105 or 110?
Yeah. So, and if you hit 100, are you going to stop?
Yeah, exactly. What if you could do 150 kilo back squat? What's that mean to you?
Yeah.
Does it actually mean anything? And how does that impact on your sport or what you're training for? Does it make you a better runner? Maybe not. Does it make you any better runner than someone that can do 120 kilo squat? Maybe not.
Yeah. So what is that effort really supporting? What goal or objective or vision are you trying to accomplish? Is it total wellness, or do you have a particular end in mind, or at least a short-term end? Like, I had a race goal. Other people have different fitness goals, OCRs. I want to do whatever, but that's not the end of the story.
No, that's right. And if you're a power lifter, then chasing numbers on your squat, bench, deadlift, makes sense. But if you're a runner, then that stuff in that work in the gym is just there to support your sport. It's just there to improve the durability of your body, to build the durability of your body so that you can perform your sport as best you can, and you can hit your goals in that sport, not in the gym.
So from a coaching perspective, when you work with athletes, are there certain recovery methods outside of, within the context of an effort, that you recommend athletes to participate in, or some of the various modalities for recovery?
I don't, apart from, sleep is the king of recovery. People have to make sure they're getting adequate sleep. If you're not doing that, then you're wasting your time with anything else.
Yeah.
So that's the main one. Making sure that they've got a diet that's supporting their body, eating nutrient dense foods. So they're kind of the two main ones. There's a lot of recovery modalities out there, different types of toys, I guess, or tools. I prefer to refer to them as toys because most of them are that. And there's not a lot of science behind a hell of a lot of the stuff as well. There's some things that they might give you a kind of 1% to 2% improvement in the perception of pain or whatever. But for the majority of people I deal with, who aren't elite athletes, the two main things are sleep and food. People will often use things like ice baths and that sort of stuff for recovery, which aren't necessarily a great tool for recovery because they're just adding another layer of stress. Saunas, that sort of thing as well. Again, they're just another stressor. So people have to be very careful about the application of things like heat and cold exposure work and make sure they're doing it, make sure they understand what they're doing and what impact it's having on the body. And then you get into things like massage, the various massage type tools. Then compression gear, that sort of thing. So and then you've got the other stuff as well, like your meditation, your breath work, and things like that as well. So I guess you've got a few different buckets there of recovery modalities. I kind of like to stick with the traditional kind of sleep and food.
Now you did mention breath work, and I know that's a key element, and that was a new one for me in focused breath work. Maybe we can expand on the use of that as a tool within the context of, just before you work out, and then there's the post.
So, breath is one of kind of two key ways that you can influence your state, breath and your vision, ways that you can influence, your state, how you're feeling, and also your physiology as well. And now we use breath work pre-training to get you ready for the stressor to come of the training. Now, typically we'll do something like what's called a step-up protocol, which is a breathing protocol that increases your respiratory rate. You're breathing faster, and that's kind of increasing your arousal state. So it's kind of ramping you up a little bit. But sometimes people that might not be the best thing for some people if they're already in that kind of heightened arousal state before training. Now, they might have finished work, driven to the gym in traffic, they walk into the gym and they're already kind of in a bit of a stressed state. So doing a step-up protocol and increasing that may not be the best idea. So that's the thing with breath work as well, is it's quite individual. There are some general principles, but breath work itself, a bit like nutrition, and there's some general principles of nutrition, but how different things affect different people, varies greatly. So but that's what we'll typically do before a training session, is some breath work to get the person prepared for the stress to come of training. Then we also have something like a pulmonary warm-up. So a traditional pre-training warm-up might get the body warmed up in a particular way. You might get a bit of a light sweat on, the joints get lubricated, that sort of thing, but your lungs don't necessarily, your lungs and your airways aren't necessarily ready. And when you're out for a run and you get your second wind, about a mile or two into the run, that's really your respiratory system, your pulmonary system saying, hey, I'm ready to go, I'm warmed up. So the point of the pulmonary warm-up is to get that second wind before you actually start the work. And you won't feel as terrible on the first mile or two of a run.
Right.
When you first go out the door, everything kind of hurts a little bit. You're breathing quite heavily, and then you get that second wind that feels a lot easier. The pulmonary warm-up helps that feel easy from the word go.
Yeah, first mile is always a hard one on the mental state, because you're like, why am I huffing so hard and my pace is just not anything close?
Yeah, and that's just your airways and that sort of thing getting opened up, getting ready to go, and making it easy for you to breathe. So we like to do the pulmonary warm-up, which gets you ready for that. And then when you're actually performing, when you're doing the work, We look at using the different breathing gears, and depending on the actual training session, what we're doing in the training session will depend on what gears or gear we focus on using. But being training, you work on different gears at different points in your training. So we might, for instance, do a 10K run going no harder than gear 2, which is a power nasal inhale, and then a relaxed nasal exhale. So the point of that is that you're just developing your capacity at that gear or up to that gear over the course of that 10K run. And you're getting to know what that feels like over the course of that run. You're developing your tolerance to carbon dioxide as well, and developing your skill at using the gears 1 and 2. But then when it comes to, say, an event, you can use all of your gears, because it's a race, it's an event, and you've developed the capacity and the skill to use those gears, and then you can utilize them as you need to during the actual event. And the whole idea of the gears is that it's about changing your breathing pattern based on the energy demands of the task. And the example I like to use is if you're running along and you come to a hill, you might be running along in gear 1, which is just an even nasal inhale and exhale. So it's a nice low aerobic effort, nice and easy. Then as you start going up the hill, the energy demands of that task increase. So you need to start moving a bit more air through the body because the carbon dioxide is building up in your body. So you need to start, bringing in a little bit more air, getting a bit more oxygen in your body to get that oxygen and carbon dioxide balance back again. So you go into gear 2. As you keep going up that hill, the energy demands are increasing still. So you need to change your breathing pattern again. So you'll do a gear 3, which is a power nasal inhale, power nasal exhale. So it's more like, so it's a more rapid respiratory rate. Then gear 4, as you're still going up that hill, again, the energy demands are continuing to increase. So the difficulty of the task is increasing. And that's when you open your mouth in gear 4 to blow off some of that carbon dioxide that's building up in the body. So it's, and with this stuff, a lot of the time people do this stuff instinctively.
Right.
They change their breathing pattern. It just happens. But the gears are more about doing it consciously, knowing that, okay, I need to change here because I'm feeling it. And then as you get towards the top of that hill, you might go to mouth because it's, the accumulated carbon dioxide in the body as you've been going up the hill. So it's so in and out through the mouth. And then as you, crest the hill and it flattens off again, levels out, and the intensity demands, are dropping, or the energy demands are dropping from that task, and you're starting to recover, you can downshift back through the gears and get back to that gear 1 eventually, where you're doing more of a low aerobic effort. Because if you try and stay in kind of gears 4 and 5, which are kind of the anaerobic efforts, then you're going to burn out pretty damn quick.
Right.
And that's when you see people running along, huffing and puffing through their mouth, jaws dropped open, positions, collapsed.
Yeah, they're pretty cooked at that point.
Yeah, and they're just having a horrible time.
Yeah.
So if you're aware of, okay, my breath can help me manage the energy demands of what's going on, and not get to that state, then you're going to be in a better position overall, and you're going to be able to perform better over the long haul. So
yeah,
and
that's
then,
a great description of it. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's kind of the example I come back to every time, because that most people run up a hill, they know what it's like, and it kind of makes sense to them. So, and then we have post-training breath protocols, which are designed to do the opposite of what the pre-training do, and they're designed to lower arousal, to kind of go from that sympathetic kind of stressed state of training to a more of a parasympathetic state, to kind of get into that rest, digest kind of state post-training, rather than just finishing the run, grabbing the car keys, jumping in the car and sitting in traffic, or leaving the gym, jumping in the car, whatever, or going back to work, or going home to the kids, or whatever. So you got to kind of shift your state from that stress state to a more relaxed state, so that you can then get on with the rest of your day post training, and really just get the body set for recovery.
No, that's, like I was saying, that's a great description on, and often you mentioned a piece about it, that being cognitively aware of it. You know, we all do it in some form or fashion, but recognizing you do have influence and some control over that, and that it's another aspect of training, you know, and I can personally attest to somebody recently developing this in it as one of the tools I can use. It also, I would say for me, helped me flatten out the effort on my recovery, meaning it didn't feel as peaked, like so much effort and then crashing. And then the rest of my day, cause I'll usually do it in the morning, I felt less than throughout the day. Like I was just shot before I started doing breath work, where, like you were saying, the 3 different efforts, they prime you up. So then I'm further along in the prep. So that first mile isn't exhausting or feel awkward. It's personal testimony.
It's not such a sudden whack to your system.
Yeah.
You know, if I just go out into my garage now and get stuck straight into a training session, then I'll probably be pretty cooked for the rest of the day. But if because I'm going from kind of 0 to 100 and then trying to get back to 0, and it doesn't work like that. I'll kind of go 0 to 100 and then I'll go to like minus 100 where I'm cooked.
Yeah.
But if, you can slowly ramp up, hit the work, slowly ramp down, and then you're good to go again. It's not such a sudden sledgehammer to the body and the system.
Yeah. It's just a level of effectiveness on the efforts, and then also even on the back end. Like I personally just always felt better, more energized throughout the whole day than historically.
And it's just about being a bit smarter with how you approach your training, and looking at the big picture and doing things that are going to support your health as well as your actual performance in your sport.
Yeah, regardless of the sport, or whether you're like most of us who got the day job, but you still want to keep pursuing that goal or objective or whatever that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody wants to train like an elite athlete, but they don't realize that elite sport's not healthy. And you can talk to any retired elite athlete and they'll tell you exactly that. What they were doing, they wouldn't recommend the general public do, because it's not healthy. It's it's a job, and it's a certain they're doing they're training a certain way to achieve a certain result, and that result is not health. It's to win something.
Right.
So it's that's kind of I guess a mindset or something that a lot of the general public have to get away from. I don't need to do what elite athletes are doing.
Yeah, be your elite self, right? Get the best out of yourself, and if that's what you're pursuing, then get after it. That's
right. Yep.
Well, Jason, I appreciate the time. We're kind of coming up on it here. I did want to close out with a couple of questions for you. So, What are you reading right now?
I'm actually I normally have a couple of books on the go at one time. I'm actually rereading The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Yes.
I first read that back in about 2018, and then picked it up again just recently to kind of delve into it and go over my notes that I've got in it and that sort of thing, and I guess study it a little bit more. And it's probably an appropriate book for the current time.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and then the other one I'm reading is a book called One-Fourteenth of an Elephant, and it's written by a gentleman who was a POW in the Second World War. He worked on what's called the Thai-Burma Railway, which a lot of Australian and British POWs were involved in back in the Second World War after the fall of Singapore. and I think about 20 to 30,000 of those POWs died in the process of that. So
wow.
It's actually called 1/14 of an elephant because the guys worked out that they had 2 elephants helping at one point in one of the POW camps, and they worked out that each man was worth about 1/14 of what the work one elephant could do. So that's why they, moving
that was their
loads,
assessed value.
essentially, yeah, that's right. That's their value was 1/14 of an elephant. But reading that and the conditions that they had to put up with, and it's just puts a lot of things in perspective. We have absolutely nothing to complain about at the moment. They had dysentery, cholera that went through the camps, every year, where they would lose, there might be 1,000 guys in the camp, and they would lose half of those to cholera.
Wow.
And just the barbaric conditions that they lived in, and they were living on, kind of a few scraps of rice a day, and that sort of thing, and no clean water. These guys didn't even have clothes. They basically just had like a loincloth, no shoes or anything like that. And
wow.
One point in the book, they were drilling through rock to get this railway to put explosive devices down into the rock. And they didn't have drills or anything, but they had these drill bits, these large drill bits, and one guy had to hold the drill bit while the other one hit it with a hammer, and then they would turn it half a turn each hit, and then turn it half a turn, and then hit it again, turn it half a turn. So they were essentially being a manual drill.
Wow.
With one guy holding it, the other guy hitting it with a hammer. And so, yeah, that's what I'm reading at the moment. I actually did start reading that probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and for whatever reason put it down, and got distracted and went on to something else, and then just picked it up again about a week ago and got back into it. But so they're the 2 ones, Obstacle is the Way and 1/14 of an Elephant. So I usually have 2 or 3 books going at one time. And it's kind of my goal these days is to read less books, but to get more from them, or to learn more from them, rather than just consuming, 100 books a year.
Yeah.
I'd rather consume 10 or 5 even and get more from them.
Yeah, I've come to a similar epiphany recently where I felt like I was consuming a lot on the personal development side. And at some point they echo the same thing. And it's like, okay, let's just
definitely
drill deep and just soak in something for a minute rather than just consume. I'm going to have to check out that book. I'm a big fan of military and a great deal of respect for their service. And which, sidebar, thank you for your service in the police force. For your time there. And so I'm going to have to check it out, especially, coming from the American perspective, that's, similar burdens and hurdles, but limited context sometimes. So it's good to get additional worldviews.
For sure.
So what are you listening to right now? Music or podcast?
I don't listen to a lot of music. The only time I really have music on is when I'm training, and I just have a playlist on Spotify that I've had for probably 10 years that I'll occasionally add to or delete things from. And that's just my training kind of tunes playlist on Spotify that I always have going. I always put it on shuffle, but for some reason it seems to play the same songs all the time. even though there's about 500 songs on there, I think I seem to hear the same 20. So I'm not sure what's going on with their shuffle. But apart from that, podcasts, I typically I don't listen to too many podcasts because I work from home and I don't have a commute. I don't have a lot of time to listen to podcasts, but I listen to a regular one. It's called the U Project, which is a guy here in Australia called Craig Harper. He's I guess you could call him a coach, motivational speaker, which he hates being called, but that's what he often gets described as. But he's up to about episode 180 or something on his podcast, and it's just always good content. He has some interesting guests on there. I like Craig's style. He's very down to earth. I've done some or been to some of his events, and have had a call with him before and that sort of thing. And I actually hooked up a guest for him just recently on the podcast. So I just connected a guy in the US that I know with Craig, and he got him on the podcast, which was always good, which was a good one. So yeah, that's really the only podcast I listen to. Occasionally I'll delve into some other ones if I see someone post something on Instagram about a particular episode of a podcast, then I'll jump on that and have a listen, or any of the ones that any of the Power Speed Endurance team are on, I'll jump on there and have a listen to it, see what Brian or Rob are saying, and then make sure we're on the same page.
It's kind of important, right? Yeah.
That's it, exactly. But any time those guys are on a podcast, I tune in, and I tend to learn something all the time. So always a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, always something to learn. So this is the Rest and Recovery podcast. So what is your go-to rest and recovery method?
Sleep.
I was going to say, I think you answered that one already. Sleep.
100%. Yeah, always has been. Even, I'm a big fan of naps during the day, even if it's just I'm the sort of person that can put my head down for 15 minutes, go to sleep, wake up, and I'm good to go again. So yeah, definitely sleep. That's my go-to.
I'm very jealous of anyone who can do that, because that's not one thing I've been able to do. It's not that I don't like naps. I just can't seem to shut my brain off enough to do it. My wife, on the other hand, she's very good at it, and I just look at her and I'm just, darn it.
Yep, my other half's the same. She hates that I can do that, because if she goes to lie down for a nap, she'll wake up 2 hours later and she'll feel like crap for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like 15 minutes up, good to go.
Nice. Well, Jason, again, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a great episode, wealth of information, some tactical and practical things. And before we close out, though, how can people find you on the social webs?
Probably Instagram is the best one. It's just Jason Donaldson _ It's nice and easy, but that's pretty much the main place I am on the socials.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks again. Have a great one.
No worries. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks.